Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan. Arif, are you ready for Trubisky this weekend?
I am extremely ready.
It's time. The time is now. Children are our future. This is happening.
Bring on the takes.
We were discussing earlier on the show whether or not it would be good for your brand if Trubisky throws 6 touchdowns to the left and then name checks you in the post-game interview on the field. And I think we determined that it would be good for your brand only if he name checks you on the field. Like if he just throws the 6 touchdowns, it's no good for you.
Right. I mean, I suppose like after the 6th touchdown, if he makes a celebration that is very clearly a reference to me, which I have no idea what that would look like, but if it's like very clearly a reference to me, that's probably good.
Starts pretending to swim.
And then he'd be asked about it afterwards, you know.
Maybe he starts pretending to swim like a cod, like he's trying to bring attention to the cod crisis.
To the North Cod. Yeah. That I could see that. Maybe in the post-game presser, if he name checks me, I could see that being helpful. But yeah, other than that, honestly, he should just throw interceptions to the left. I'm a big fan of that.
Would that be? I think that would actually be better for your. Well, I don't know. I don't know if that would be better for your brand necessarily than him name checking you after throwing 6 touchdowns, but we'll see.
No, the name check is the best in terms of my brand, but failing that, throwing 6 touchdowns to the left would be awful for my brand, and so there's a high risk if he throws well to the left, but it's only profit if he throws poorly to the left.
So we've got a lot of things to talk about, including the victory over Oakland, which that felt like the opposite of the Green Bay game, and the Green Bay game felt like the opposite of the Falcons game. So apparently we're just going to be doing this during alternating weeks. So that'll be fun. Look forward to that. Yeah. So we've got a lot of things to talk about, but we have some cool announcements to talk about before we go into things even like the re-signing of Treadwell and Marcus Sherrill. So, again, thank you guys so much for listening and helping out the show, whether or not you're helping out just posting on social media or whether you are donating to the show. Kind of, if you hear value in what we are producing and what we put out, you can donate in one of 2 different ways. You can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate there. We are doing a little promotion right now. If you donate $3.50 or more via Patreon at the end of the month, we will be sending out some free swag. We've got plenty of stuff from the New York trip. We also have a few random things from years past that we have not gotten rid of, and I feel like this is the right time to do it. So we may or may not have something involving Christian Ponder. This is not meant to discourage you from donating, mind you. This is just something that you may receive. Sadly, it's not signed, but maybe one day you too can either have it signed or just be blocked by his wife on Twitter. So if you donate $3.50 or more to the show via Patreon, you can get some free swag. So if you're interested in doing that, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and donate to the show there. That is much more of a subscription-based thing. It's like an NPR pledge drive, so you can just go there and do that, and you can get some free swag out of us. Also, breaking news. We have our live show announcement. So on November 29th, we will be taping a special live edition of Norse Code from a bar in the Seattle area. In Seattle, it is called Petoskey's. That is the name that they have, that's how they've wanted it to be pronounced. So Petoskey's is in Seattle, and they will be hosting us the evening of November 29th, which is the day after Thanksgiving. So that Friday, we will be doing a special live edition of Norse Code. We had a hell of a lot of fun doing the show in New York. Met a bunch of you, had a blast. Come out to the Seattle game. Check us out. We will be over at Petoskey's probably around 7 or 8 o'clock. We have not nailed down a time yet, but head out to Petoskey's. on November 29th. I have told the owner that we will have at least one person there, so please do not make me a liar. Again, we're super excited about that and really happy to get that booked. They actually just about an hour or so ago, I finished up the booking with them, and they've already promoted the show. So check them out. This should be this should be a hell of a lot of fun. And the menu is very Minnesota centric. Very, very Midwestern food centric. So
Juicy Lucy's. They got tater tot hot dishes. Other less stereotypical but still very Minnesotan food.
Exactly. And the dude's originally from St. Cloud, so he was really happy to be hosting a Minnesota Vikings podcast. So check him out. We will be there November 29th, and I will be pimping this show until the day before we leave. So again, November 29th. Check us out. That should be awesome. So all of that aside, the first thing that we should probably talk about on Norse Code this episode is apparently nostalgia is back in full swing, because we re-signed both Laquon Treadwell and Marcus Sherrills to the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, I mean, Green Day's released a new album. Blink-182 just released a new album. Foo Fighters just released a new album. It was time for throwbacks, and I think Marcus Sherrills, Laquon Treadwell, all pro level punt gunners each. Joining the team to supplement the special teams unit. Just really phenomenal stuff. So, big throwback time. Mitch Trubisky has been compared several times by people not in Minnesota to Christian Ponder, also a throwback. Just really, I think, a good time to be looking backwards, because, hey, you remember Sherrills. You like Sherrills. Why not more?
Is Asiata next in all of this? Like, I feel like
Athriata?
Yes. 3 touchdowns or nothing.
I hope not. Not for anything he's done. He did all right in the AAF, but rather because I really like these running backs. We're doing all right.
So Treadwell is coming onto the team directly as a result of the injury to Chad Beebe, who is now going to be going on IR. Correct?
Yes. BB. Well, I don't know if BB is going on IR. No, he is. That was in the announcement, which sucks. But I think was he injured on the play he was also penalized on, which that happened to a Falcons player too. But that seems to be the case, right? Where he was injured on the play where he earned an illegal blocking penalty.
I didn't catch exactly where he got hurt, and I haven't seen any clips on Twitter as to exactly when he was when he ended up getting hurt. I didn't when I watched the replay, I didn't even see him go down necessarily. I just saw a lot of Thielen going, "What the hell is going on? And why are you trying to call this on me?"
Right, yeah, which was really funny. But yeah, it was called on BB. And the reason it's a penalty, and I clarified this with some other people, is so the NFL sent out an officiating video last week about this kind of penalty. So I actually watched that even before this game had started. The reason it's a penalty is because BB is moving back towards his own end line, which is part of the expanded definition of what blindside blocks are. And in order to do that and still have a legal block, he needs to primarily block with his hands. He lowered his shoulder, which is part of the reason he got injured, because he was blocking like Vontaze Burfict or something. Like, oh boy, good luck. But yeah, so that took away that penalty. But yeah, so we get Treadwell back. That seems so optimistic. Treadwell comes back.
It's a gift. It's every day is a gift with Laquon Treadwell.
And the one of the benefits to bringing Treadwell back is actually you get to add a receiver to the roster that has no cap impact. Or rather, the cap impact is net neutral. I shouldn't say no cap impact. So his veteran's minimum salary does count against the cap at the veteran minimum, which I think the CBA says that if you sign someone for the veteran minimum, no matter how much the cost is, the cap hit is around $600,000. And then the Vikings get credit for $600,000 against next year's cap. So they still have to have the cap room to sign him. They do. They sign him, and then next year the Vikings get like an extra $600,000. So great. And that's because they're already liable for the full cap of his guaranteed salary. So that's part of the reason they probably signed him. Plus, obviously, he knows the offense. He was working all offseason in the offense. I don't expect him to make a big impact. He was cut, but, whoever, takes his place amongst the receivers on the roster will probably see snaps instead, which in this case is BC Johnson. I had kind of hoped that they would promote someone up from the practice squad, like Dylan Mitchell, maybe Davion Davis. But instead, they bring someone on who has experience in the offense and is a really good special teamer.
So there is that. Speaking of a very good special teamer, Marcus Sherrills, who, unless I'm mistaken, never played a regular season game for the Saints, also is coming in presumably to handle kick returns, and he also did play corner for a little while as well.
Yeah, that's the rumor. But yeah,
I saw it at least once. Like it did happen seeing him in the backfield at least once, or he was just confused on which down he was supposed to be out there.
What am I doing here?
I'm a gunner.
But yeah, so Sherrills is obviously so. Treadwell is there. So Treadwell was signed and Sherrills was signed, and so they put BB on IR, but they had to make another move, and they actually instead of moving a cornerback like Mark Fields, which I had expected, or Chris Boyd off the roster, they actually put Davion Davis onto IR. So the Vikings now have 7 cornerbacks. But Sherrills is there to replace the punt return capability of Chad Beebe, while Laquon Treadwell is there to replace the receiving capability. Well, that's optimistic, but in theory, to replace the receiving capability of Beebe. And that's really great news because Sherrills has something that BB doesn't, which is hands. He has a much better capability to hold on to the ball and prevent it from being muffed and stuff like that. He also, I think people have forgotten a little bit, he's also an extremely explosive punt returner. So if you take a look, 2015 through 2019, obviously he didn't actually return any punts in 2019. If you take a look at every player who's returned at least 50 punts, which I think is a pretty good cutoff, the order goes Tyreek Hill in terms of yards per punt return. Tyreek Hill, Darren Sproles, Tariq Cohen, and Marcus Sherrills. So he's fourth among that really astounding group of players in yards per punt return. He hasn't had a ton of punt return touchdowns recently. He had a couple of them in the middle of his career, but 3 in that span, none last year. But he always has that capability. And of course, he's fielded a ton of punts because the Vikings defense has been so good over that time. So he has the most punt return yards of anybody in that span. But yeah, very capable punt returner, primarily at this point in his career, probably more a safe option than an explosive option. But I think he still does have that capability despite being 31. So really great as an asset there. Better than BB, but BB's younger, more cost controlled in some ways. I mean, veterans minimum, you don't really have to worry about cap hit. And also BB fills a spot at an area of need in terms of depth, whereas at cornerback, even though the Vikings do need depth there, they do have more options. So that's probably one of the reasons that the Vikings weren't as willing to be aggressive about going after Marcus Sherrills last offseason. But now they have him.
And I suppose the other reason why Sherrills is out there potentially returning kicks is because the Vikings are so thin at wide receiver at the moment that it would be better if somebody like Sherrills went out, worst case scenario if he got hurt, than have another wide receiver go out.
Yeah, you don't want to expose another wide receiver to that, because then now you're down to 3 and now you have to promote somebody who's clearly not ready to play. Whereas at cornerback, yeah, you've got an injury concern with Mike Hughes still. How likely is he to be re-injured? But I mean, you have 7 bodies there now. Nate Metters, Mark Fields, Chris Boyd, none of that's very confidence inspiring, but it's better than literally a vacuum or a void. So having Sherrills, be the punt returner where, I mean, you take some of the hardest hits, that's definitely substantially better.
So we do have a game to talk about as far as the Oakland game. The Vikings were victorious. They did defeat the Oakland Raiders. Boy, that was one hell of a start to the game. The Vikings ended up jumping out to quite the lead. And Kirk Cousins appears to have bounced back as he does. Vikings Twitter shut up briefly about the play of Kirk Cousins, but it was impressive to note that he did look a little bit more confident. He did look better. I don't know if his reads were better, but he did end up looking a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed more controlled in the pocket, and part of that might just be because he was under pressure 30% of his snaps, which is really remarkably low, one of the lowest in his tenure as a Viking. I think there was one game last year where he wasn't pressured as much, but 30% is really remarkable over the course of a year, at least over the course of the 2018 season. If he's pressured at a 30% rate for the entire year, that ranks fifth best among all quarterbacks in the NFL last year. So that's really great to see, and that might be part of the reason he was more composed and calm in the pocket. He definitely did go through his reads and was able to push the ball a little bit downfield when he needed to, average 8.3 yards per attempt, had a touchdown, had a high completion rate, and all that. And so, he's basically asked to manage the game because the Vikings got to an early lead very quickly, but an early lead quickly, that's kind of redundant, but they got to an early lead, and he was kind of part of it, right? The one touchdown. So, good game from him. I don't know how meaningful it is. I mean, there's a lot you can take from a game like this, even though it kind of resists, exploration just because of how mismatched the teams were. But, it's difficult specifically to have Cousins takes. Like, it's good he didn't panic. That's kind of a low bar. We didn't want to see him kind of spiral. We didn't want to see him struggle. That's true, but, whether or not this means anything positive as opposed to it prevents us from reading negative things, those are kind of two different realms of analysis. And yeah, we're not reading negative things, and that's, a takeaway given what happened in the Packers game. But we don't know if we've learned anything about his ability to perform in situations where he needs to perform. So that's going to be a test we're going to see next week. We're going to have a guest on to talk about it. It's going to be the normal guest. It's Lauren Cox. So we're going to talk about that. But
you just want him on because he has the world's greatest Twitter handle.
Yeah, at Cox Sports One. Yes. Phenomenal. It's the best. But yeah, good from Cousins. Is it meaningful? In some ways, yes, but mostly no. We'll kind of see if that bears out against a tougher opponent in a more important game. But yeah, I mean, I liked seeing it. He got through his reads. He was relatively accurate. Missed a couple of throws that got away from him. They weren't impactful. Didn't fumble. Great. So
important.
Yeah. So hooray.
Hooray. So Kirk Cousins played better, and Dalvin Cook and the run game looked spectacular. It looked almost like the Raiders were not built to be able to stop the run at all.
You say that, but that's kind of all they were asked to do in the offseason in terms of the way they built their team. So that's kind of funny. They prioritized a defensive end who could stop the run more than rush the passer. They got two linebackers who can't cover and can only stop the run. And despite that, Dalvin Cook manages 6.9 yards per carry on 16 carries, 110 rushing yards. There it is. Plus one touchdown, two touchdowns on the ground, some number of touchdowns on the ground.
It happened anyway. It was a thing.
Yeah. And he did a great job. Great after contact. Didn't need to be as good after contact in this game as he was in the last game. Lower percentage of his yards came after contact, something like 49 of his 110 yards came after contact, which is still a relatively high amount for a running back, but relatively low given his experience in Minnesota. So really good to see his play. And I think you can actually draw something from what he did just because we got to see kind of different kinds of plays that he was able to excel in. So last week, he's bouncing first week he's bouncing a ton of runs instead of following the initial read or the initial design of the play. Week 2, he's excelling, but a lot of it's kind of wide. And now we're seeing him play inside, outside, seeing him play split zones and stuff like that. So a full kind of gamut of rushing plays that he was able to excel in. Small creases he was able to exploit, which I think a lot of people have been talking about. Oh, you can just find the narrowest crease and explode through it. But, as kind of tired as that analysis is, it's also true. And we got to see a lot of it in that Raiders game. So had the ability to shed a bunch of tackles again and push through contact, but importantly, avoid initial contact in the first place. So Cook is now making a good case for being one of the top running backs in the league. I think Vikings fans kind of always felt that he could earn that kind of respect to be a top 5 back in the league. That's always difficult because as a fan, a lot of people will say, hey, my running back, not a lot of people know about him, but he's secretly a top 5 guy. I mean, Aaron Jones is kind of the same way in Green Bay, where Green Bay fans say, hey, he's really underrated. He's actually quite good. But, we don't get to see a lot of him. And Lions fans will say the same thing about Kerryon Johnson. Like, hey, he missed some time, but, his rookie year was really phenomenal. And now Vikings fans get to kind of see their version of that replicated on a national stage where, Brian Westbrook, former Eagles running back, is saying that he thinks Dalvin Cook is the best running back in the league. The numbers bear it out. He's got the highest yards per carry in the league. I think he has the highest number of expected points per carry in the league. If not, he's second. And then, he's third in yards after contact per attempt. He's number 1 in PFF grade. He's making a really good case for being the best running back in the league, and I think we saw why in the Oakland game. And even though he averaged just under 7 yards per attempt, 6.9, he actually reduced his total yards per carry versus last game, which was 7.7. So he's having a really phenomenal year, broke a record or set a Vikings record for having 3 consecutive games at the beginning of the season with 100-plus yards. No Vikings running back has ever done that, despite having some pretty good ones in their history. I mean, Adrian Peterson known to be kind of a slow starter. But you go back all the way to like Chuck Foreman and Robert Smith and the incredible history the Vikings have had at running back, and that's never happened before. But Dalvin Cook did it, and he's doing it on not necessarily a ton of carries. Again, in this game, 19 carries, not like 25 or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, the offense seems to be revolving around him. I would say it's not revolving around him as much as people kind of want to read into it, just because they've gotten out to these leads. But the fact that he's had such a heavy workload in situations where defense expect him to get the ball and he's been able to produce, that's all really phenomenal stuff.
And let's not forget the important aspect of this, that he's being asked to, at the end of games anyway, just, grind it out and hold on to the football, and he is doing just that. This isn't a guy who appears to have a fumble problem. This is somebody who is holding onto the ball and making sure that the time does, in fact, drain off the clock.
Right, yeah, I remember it was either last year or his rookie year, there was a concern about drops, which he didn't have at Florida State. Last year, there was a concern about fumbles, which he didn't have at Florida State. And so far, neither of those concerns have materialized this season, which I think makes sense. I think that we just had small samples for him because of injuries, where a particular concern cropped up, and then we didn't just have kind of a long period of time to average that out and tell us, hey, this isn't actually a problem, like we suspected, given kind of the resume of his career. So now we're not seeing drops from him. We're not seeing fumbles from him, as we expected, but that's important because that's kind of a big part of what rounds out a good running back. So yeah, he's securely holding on to the ball in situations where the defense is doing more to kind of force a turnover than get a tackle because it's late in the game and they're behind. And also, he's still getting a bunch of yards in situations where his primary job is to run the clock. A 4-yard run on 1st and 10 is a huge victory in that situation. And he's still getting like 7 or 8 yards on those runs.
And he's catching the ball, and he's doing a hell of a lot of good things for the offense. But in case you haven't seen him play before, this appeared to be a bit of a coming out party for Irv Smith Jr., who is a backup tight end who was all over the field and became a good target for Cousins.
Yeah, yeah, you could say this was his coming out party, 60 yards or something like that. And actually, he should have much more, but a lot of it was called back on that penalty we were talking about at the beginning of the show, where he should have something like 75 or something like that. 72. I think he should have 72 yards, and then he lost 12 of them because of that penalty. So actually a really phenomenal performance. A lot of it was on plays that he ran at Alabama, so I wouldn't say that this performance is sustainable going forward. And obviously, I don't think anyone's expecting him to average like 60 yards a game from here on out. That's not what I mean by it's not sustainable. Obviously, that's just not going to continue because the Vikings have such much more interesting targets to throw to when they do throw the ball, whenever that is. But I think that we're not likely to see all of these plays always available to him because he has a relatively limited repertoire and he's adding to it as time goes on. So I'm not saying that, we won't see him kind of reemerge later in the season or that he won't even get many yards in these upcoming games, but rather I don't think we're going to see this explosion again just because he's running literally the exact same stuff he ran at Alabama, and teams will probably close down on it sooner rather than later. That said, really good to see because the fact that he can do the stuff that he did in Alabama tells us immediately that some parts of his games do translate. And that's a really important part because if you can't even do the stuff that you did in college, what are you doing? I mean, that's where a lot of, these gadget players, and he's playing a lot like a gadget player, have busted in the NFL. So if he can at least do that, that's really good news. And if he doesn't continue to develop as a tight end, he will continue to be an asset because he's already a really good run blocker, which the Vikings didn't even anticipate. And that's really good to see. Plus, he has the ability to kind of get downfield or move across the formation and generate a bunch of free yards in the flat. So he's always going to be an option for the Vikings if this continues to be who he is. Plus, he's got all this upside where I think he might be able to recapture later in the season the kind of things that'll allow him to be a 60, 70-yard guy.
And the other thing I want to mention about the offense is the play of the offensive line. And it wasn't great by any stretch of the imagination, but this was pretty good. And the Vikings, correct me if I'm wrong, they didn't give up a sack.
Yeah, they didn't give up a sack. And like I said, they only allowed a 30% pressure rate. Both, I think that you're right. Great results, probably good play. Like I wouldn't say they played remarkably out of their minds or anything like that, either in the run game or as pass protectors. But they played much better than they did against the Packers. Mind you, the Packers obviously have this really astounding defensive line and the Raiders kind of don't. But I mean, this is a really great start. You want them to play really well against defensive lines that don't have a ton of talent, because otherwise, I mean, then you're really having a discussion about whether or not they're one of the worst offensive lines in the league, which, I mean, they're still part of that discussion. I mean, Pro Football Focus just released some offensive line rankings for week 3. The Vikings rank, I think, like 24th. So they're just kind of out of that territory as being one of the worst offensive lines in the league. But, I think the Vikings, they're striving to get that offensive line to 15th. I think that's the goal right now. And more performances like this, or, level of play like this, I think that'll move them in that direction, because while the offensive line did make mistakes and allowed some backdoor pressure, allowed, some tackles for loss to emerge, or potential tackles for loss were not for Dalvin Cook to kind of emerge and not sustain some of these run blocks. I think kind of, if they continue to play at this level, and then, lose more against higher level defensive lines and win more against, lower level offensive or defensive lines, I think they're moving towards that kind of 15th level. And I think that that's where you can get kind of comfortable, because I think Cousins has an ability to kind of operate in that situation. He's not Deshaun Watson, where he's just going to constantly be pressured and find ways to make it look good. He needs that supporting cast. We've talked about it a lot, but in particular, I think that he needs to, get into a rhythm, and that rhythm is much easier when pressure isn't coming immediately. So, I'll say Riley Reiff, another really great game. Bradbury, I think, is improved. I would say we're not at a scenario where we can say, he's getting better because he improved against a much worse defensive tackle unit. But this is a good sign, and, take it with you. Concerned about Josh Klein's concussion. Hopefully he'll be available for the game against Chicago. But, and Dakota Dozier didn't play very well in his stead. But, Klein has continued to play well for 3 games. That's really good to see. And really, your concerns are kind of localized to Pat Elflein and Garrett Bradbury. And if Bradbury does improve, if this game is a sign of improvement, having one problem offensive lineman is a lot better than a lot of teams get to. So this offensive line is in a better spot. They didn't play brilliantly. I don't think anyone expects them to, but they played well enough for Cousins to manage a pocket and pressure rate. A lot of that has to do with the quarterback. And if pressure's not coming immediately, then the quarterback, if they can get rid of the ball quickly, can manage or control the pocket. And if the offensive line can play well enough for Cousins to at least control the amount of pressure he receives after 2.5 seconds, that's really good.
I was going to ask if our center had a better PFF grade for this game or not. There were a couple times that he got burned, but I did see a few blocks that he threw that he was able to work at.
Yeah, he had a really remarkably bad PFF grade, but it was better than his grades in the past 2 games. So, that tells you, A, how bad his grades were in the prior 2 games, but also, You know, he's improving. I think he's still like the lowest graded center or whatever, which that makes sense given kind of his performance in the previous two games. I would say I agree with what PFF said about those first two games about Bradbury. I would probably have graded him higher in this game than PFF did. But that's not to say he played at an average or even simply below average level. He still struggled a lot. But good to see. I don't know if this is the beginning of some improvement trajectory or if it's a product of an opponent or if it's just random noise. These things happen. But, you know, it's better than the alternative, right? So hopefully he can build on it.
Yeah, we'll certainly take it if nothing else. So Anthony Barr did not end up playing. He was injured for, I believe it was a groin pull or something along those lines. Regardless, the Vikings did end up with 4 sacks on Carr, and this was. I want to say that this didn't like the score indicates that it was a closer game than it was. This was Derek Carr getting harassed and making terrible life choices behind the line while getting chased around.
Yeah, I mean it was just an awful day for him, right?
Hunter, the pick to Harrison Smith, gold. That it was like Harrison Smith was the intended target.
Yeah. Speaking of brand, the fact that I was like, so I mean, I'm always kind of screen capping the game as it's going on, so I can kind of tweet out what I'm seeing. And you know, I tweeted out, "Oh, this throw is really weird." He screwed it up, right? Like he throws as if he's under pressure and he's not, and his base is all wrong, and he throws that pick, and David Carr of Houston Texans fame, and also Derek Carr's brother, tweets out, "You're wrong. Minnesota played good defense," which technically that doesn't contradict my statement. Like, yeah, they had the underneath routes covered and they played good defense. And also Carr overthrew his tight end because he had a weird base.
It's the Lebowski thing. It's you're not wrong, but
right. But yeah, and so I got into it with. Well, I didn't actually get into it. They blocked me immediately after I quote tweeted his quote tweet. I guess this happens a lot. Like a lot of Raiders fans have been blocked by David Carr and also Darren Carr, the third Carr brother. And some have been blocked by Derek Carr, but he's like less active on Twitter because he has a job. I'm just like salty at Dave. I'm on Twitter all the time, right? I can't really quote too many things, but he's busy. They have time. They're tweeting all the time stuff defending Derek Carr, and Carr's not been having a great career, so they block really quickly, which does not reflect the state of David Carr's history of offensive line play. So good for him. He's finally found something that can block, but
thanks. You were either sitting on that or tweeted it earlier, so I'm glad
someone tweeted it to me. I can't take credit for it.
I'm glad you were able to use that material.
Right. But I mean, like, you know, he had a reputation at the end of his career as somebody who would fold under pressure because he was under so much pressure with the Houston Texans, which times a flat circle. Sorry, Deshaun Watson. He's the most sacked quarterback one or both of those years. And the narrative is that it rattled him and he could never kind of recover. So he is sensitive to criticism about his brother generally, but he is particularly sensitive to that criticism about his brother, which has followed him since college. Anyway, he quote tweets saying I'm wrong. I quote tweet him saying Lamau. And then he blocks me immediately, which I find hilarious because then people going through his feed won't immediately be able to see what he was quote tweeting when he was quote tweeting me. And then Darren Carr gets into it with him about how funny it is, how people don't know how to play quarterback in the NFL, which, by the way, Darren Carr did not play quarterback in the NFL, but fine. And then all these Raiders fans could just get mad at the two of them. So really great to see that. Good for my brand.
That's all.
But
That's all that's really important about any of this. This
this podcast is just is become an evolution into update on Arif's brand. Which I'm sorry if you're here for football analysis. I understand why you'd be tricked into thinking we'd talk about that.
I know the sign on the door said Norse code, but yeah.
But yeah, in terms of the amount of pressure the Vikings produced, really great stuff. I think Carr, in theory, was only pressured on about the same number, like same percentage of dropbacks as Cousins, but he didn't act like it. He didn't act like he was pressured on 30. And I think that a lot of it just has to do with the fact that the Raiders get rid of the ball really quickly. And so when they're not getting rid of the ball quickly, pressure arrives really fast. And so the Vikings are getting pressure on plays where it is possible to get pressure. And so on the percentage of plays where it is possible to get pressure, the Vikings dominated. I think Everson Griffin had another really phenomenal game. Danielle Hunter had a really good game. They both, I think, added sacks to their tally. And then Eric Wilson adds 2. One of them is because Everson Griffin is chasing Derek Carr, which actually I'm surprised that did not get turned into a run. It looked like that was the kind of thing where on Tuesday after the game, though, they would officially turn that into a run. But from my knowledge, that didn't happen. So Eric Wilson has 2 sacks, both of them unblocked, but, good for him because, he was in the right place, right time, did a great job as a quarterback spy to close down on Carr as he's bailing out of the pocket. And then actually he did a really great job on his unblock. He's unblocked because of him. So I don't want to take that away from him. He moved Hercules Mata off out of the way. And then I believe he did a version of the coffee house stunt that's been going around Twitter today where he faked as if he wasn't going and then he goes. So actually he's unblocked because of him. So I don't want to take too much away from him. But 4 sacks on Carr and just a really great performance from the defensive line. Linval, I think, had another good game. I think we're seeing more of the 2017 Linval. Not the same level as 2017 Linval, but much closer to it than 2018 Linval. And 2018 Linval was definitely a down year for him, certainly above average for a nose tackle. So to put it in context, he was either 1 or 2 in terms of the best 4-3 nose tackle in the league in 2017, played below that level last year, and now he's much closer to that level this year. And speaking of defensive linemen playing at the 2017 level, Everson Griffin is basically right there. He's playing at that level. It's really phenomenal to see. So another really great performance. I think there were a couple of Raiders fans that were really happy at how Colton Miller has been playing this year. I think that they're maybe a little bit less happy now. Colton Miller has been playing like garbage, but they've been getting to the ball quickly. And now we get to kind of see when the Raiders are forced into 3rd and 9, they have to hold on to the ball. And now that's creating pressure, and then it either creates interceptions or sacks. So really great performance. And then I would also want to isolate Eric Hendricks, who I wrote about in The Athletic, has been having just a really stunningly good year. He leads all linebackers, off-ball linebackers in run stops. And I believe he's tied for 2nd in total stops, which includes, shutting down the passing game for plays behind the line of scrimmage and stuff like that. So he's been having just a really remarkable year, and this game might be the best example of it.
Yeah, it's been really great to watch, especially not just as on a football side, but just on a personal side of just watching him reach this level again is fantastic. It really is a testament to the amount of work that he has put in over the past year to get to this point. So kudos to him. Also, I did want to mention this as a side note for the defense, and if I missed something, correct me on this, but I would like to point out that this is the first game of the season where Xavier Rhodes didn't leave the game due to an injury and come back.
Yeah, I think you're completely correct about that. I have no idea what he did during the game, which I guess is a great sign.
Well, he might have been shadowing Antonio Brown if he was still playing.
Yeah, he really shut down Antonio Brown, huh?
100% shut down. It's almost like he wasn't there.
Yeah, it really took him out of the game. Yeah, I guess in theory a great game for him. He had 2 tackles. I remember those. He's clearly not as good at stopping the run as Trey Waynes is, but he also wasn't targeted like Trey Waynes was. So you take some with the other, right? Xavier Rhodes allowed 2 receptions for 10 total yards. Bummer. One of them was on Jalen Richard. That was all after the catch. He caught the ball 1 yard beyond the line of scrimmage and then ran it for 8. So that doesn't count. Great, yeah, cool. He doesn't leave the game due to injury, therefore doesn't get burned. Great, good job. I mean, it's his job is to shut down premier wide receivers. They didn't exist in this game, so you can't really praise him too much. But given how much people were worried after the Packers game, at least he didn't get burned by Tyrell Williams. So that's good to see.
Very. So, is there anything else we should mention about the defense before we talk about how Dan Bailey hit all his kicks and thankfully everything is good? Oh, and Daniel Carlson doinked. Yeah,
the Daniel Carlson doinking was very... I feel for him, but I can understand why Vikings were like, this is justice.
It was cathartic. Quite cathartic to hear the doink. Aw, you still can't hit things in US Bank Stadium. That's too bad.
Right. So Anthony Harris remains through 3 games the top graded safety in PFF system. Harrison Smith, I think, is 11th in their 2.0 system, but I suspect in their 1.0 system, he'd actually be top 5. The reason he's 11th is because of the way they weight their grades, and his run defense grade isn't that high, but that's mostly because he hasn't been asked to do a bunch of stuff in run defense. And so the fact that he has a really high grade in coverage and as a tackler generally, that gets kind of weighted out of his final grade. So I just wanted to point that out. You've got the top safety by PFF grading, and the other one is Harrison Smith. Good to see.
We'll certainly take it if nothing else. Well, that is going to be it for the discussion on the game. Let's head over to the mailbag. We have quite a number of great questions here, including from Mick, who asks, is there any mistake Derek Carr will make that David Carr won't defend?
Well, there was one time where, and it was actually David Carr was wrong to criticize his brother. So the one time he criticized his brother, I was like, what the hell? And maybe I'm recollecting it wrong, and so I'll put it in the show notes. But he criticized Derek for crying, and it turns out that was a reaction to the concussion he received. So, good job, dude. He was like, yeah, you just got to toughen up. And it's like, well, your body just cries sometimes. There's the famous Luke Kuechly. Does anyone think Luke Kuechly's not tough? One of Luke Kuechly's concussions, he's just bawling, and I don't think he even knows it. And everyone's like, "Wow, that concussion's really bad." But then Derek Carr goes down, he gets up, he's crying, and people are like, "Yeah, what a wimp." Which I don't know, man. You play in the NFL, you're probably not a wimp. You start 40 games in the NFL, you're definitely not a wimp. And if you're a quarterback, I think. People talk a lot about how quarterbacks are protected a lot, but I mean, they get hit a ton. You're not a punter, right? The point is to kill you. That's the whole game plan is to kill you.
As far as the whole, but there is a hierarchy there because there's defensive players, there's quarterback, and then there's the kicker. So if you get the concussion as the kicker and you're crying, then you're obviously somebody who needs to be traded, and they needed to replace you.
Yeah, and I'll put the link to the show notes because maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, but he was like, yeah, he's just got to be tougher. You can't cry out on the field. And it's you don't really have control over that. It's not even a toughness thing. It's the brain is broken thing. Yeah.
This is an involuntary
that's the only
reaction.
Thing. Yeah, right. So that's the only thing that David Carr will criticize Derek Carr for. Stuff he has no control over. That's wild.
You having fun teeing off, or you ready for more? Jeez.
I liked David Carr a week ago.
All right. Brian Dunkel asks, how is Treadwell going to cost us the Bears game this weekend?
Well, I mean, he's probably not going to play from scrimmage, right? So he probably misses a tackle on Cordell Patterson on a kick return. That seems like the most right thing, right? You allow a special teams touchdown at Soldier Field to a former player who's the greatest kick returner of all time, and the guy you signed that week, who is known for being good on special teams, is the one who whiffs the key tackle. That hits 6 different notes.
that is about as Vikings as you could possibly be in that particular moment. Let's go with Zen Cupid, who asks, with Treadwell coming back and assuming that he's active on game day, has a team ever had 4 tight ends and only 3 wide receivers on the active roster during a season before the 2019 Vikings?
This century, probably not. I have no way to look that up, or I have no idea how to look that up, I should say. That's kind of fascinating. My guess is no, because who would do that on purpose?
Who would do that even accidentally? I mean, like,
right.
Oh no.
The closest thing I can think of is there was one season where Norv Turner was the head coach of the Chargers, and they opened the season with 4 receivers. So in theory, and like they had like 2 fullbacks, which I would include in because no one would be like, they didn't have 4 tight ends. They had 3 tight ends and an extra fullback. You're like, how does that not count? But I think he had 2 fullbacks and 3 or 4 tight ends. So if one of those receivers was ever injured, then it is plausible that the active game day roster had a fullback and 4 tight ends. So I'll look into it.
It sounds like receivers with more steps, quite frankly. Kevin Jellerson asks, do you think our cutting and re-signing of Treadwell is analogous to hard rebooting your computer or phone? Maybe this was the reset he needed to function as a professional wide receiver. Have you tried turning him off and turning him back on again?
Well, maybe not in quite those terms. My guess is no. That's unlikely. But, whatever works. I just feel like he's a badly designed program in this analogy, right? Like he can't. The system's malfunctioned for like 4 years. Only now do you turn it off?
He was a bit buggy, and for whatever reason, we never got the updates. Like the developer just gave up on him.
Oh, he's been abandoned.
Yeah. Darn shame. Damian Barrett asks, can you ask Arif if he thinks the Vikings have taken advantage of a collective, the NFL as a passing league mindset to capitalize on other teams being built to stop the opposition from throwing the ball? Or have we just got very talented running backs? Or both?
I would say it's more the second than the first, but I wouldn't say that they're completely ignorant of the idea that if you build an offense around the counter strategy, the countermeasure, that it could have some benefits. I mean, Zimmer's mentioned it in press conferences before that, we're seeing nickel a lot more, so we might be able to see more teams run the ball a lot more. But I mean, Kubiak has always led offenses that have been tight end heavy, fullback heavy, running back heavy, that only put 2 receivers on the field a lot. So that's just been kind of a staple of that kind of offensive design. And I do think 3 games into the season, we're seeing that it's very clearly a merger of the two, and not that, Stefanski has more control or Kubiak has more control. It very clearly seems to me that it's like close to 50-50 in terms of the amount of input they've had to that offensive design. But the parts or the remnants that are very Kubiak-ish, if you want to put it that way, are the fact that it's a bunch of 2 tight end sets or 2 running back sets or both. And so that's kind of always been the case. So I don't think that they're responding to or adapting to the way that teams have put nickel on the field more often, because they still put base packages on the field when the Vikings are in 2 tight end. So it's not as if they're like asking their tight ends to blow up some poor safety in their run blocking assignments. But I think that their comfort with that approach has been driven by the fact that teams are investing less in linebacker and that they're more willing to put dime out there and that they've got fewer reps against runs than they do against the pass. So I think those all play a role. That said, the fact that the Packers decided to give up 7 yards of carry on the ground in order to attack Cousins on play action, where I believe he completed 12% of his passes on play action, something like that, and then won the game, that seems to indicate that selling out to stop the pass and allowing the run to happen is still a solid strategy. So I don't know.
Eddie has a question for us. So he asks, was Darren Waller's success a sign of things to come for the Vikings defense or an isolated incident?
I think it's a little bit isolated. Part of it, I think, is they kind of just wanted to shut down the deeper options, and so Darren Waller just kind of showed up. He was lined up against Eric Wilson a lot, and Wilson, I think, I won't say that like, hey, the 100+ yards that Darren Waller ends up with are because of Eric Wilson, because Eric Wilson was largely all right in coverage, except for 2 really significant plays, one of which he benefited from a drop. And the other one was, it was on a wheel route. He's up against a receiver on a flea flicker. So like, can't blame him too much. He was late to react, and you can't do that, but you can't blame him too much. But which I think is why his PFF grade in coverage is like fairly average, even though he gave up like 41 yards. But when he specifically was on Waller, Waller didn't do anything. Waller was great when he started switching on to people. So he had 26 yards on Trey Waynes. He got 47 yards on Eric Kendricks, which I wouldn't blame Kendricks too much for that. That's just kind of how the coverage assignments kind of rolled out. And he just kind of peppered it against a bunch of different guys. So he got 17 on Harrison Smith, 8 on Nate Metters, which kind of doesn't count. That's where one of his touchdowns came from. His touchdown came against who did it come against? It came against someone else. But maybe he didn't have he didn't have a touchdown. I'm thinking of Tyrell Williams. I wouldn't be too worried about that. I think if there was a concern, the Vikings would have been more beat up by other tight ends so far this season. We'll see. With the Bears, because Trey Burton, I think, is healthy. So he should be a part of that offense.
Next question is from Canary Yellow, who asks, what can we honestly make of the Vikings so far? Falcons beat themselves. Vikings then beat themselves versus the Packers scum with the worst career game for our quarterback. Then the Vikings can't defend or throw or run themselves. I believe in the defense and Cook is running great, but how good are we?
I wish I could answer, but I don't know. Which is a cop-out, but I'll qualify it. I'll say, one, this defense is looking like it has the capability to be an all-time defense. I know that they gave up 21 points to the Packers at the beginning of the game, but I think that their quarter-to-quarter performance and play-to-play performance is much more indicative of who they are. They just had some confusion at the beginning of that game, and I don't think that that's the kind of thing that'll sustain itself. They've played 12 quarters. 11 of those quarters, they have been completely dominant.
I was going to say, they've had one bad quarter this whole season so far.
Yeah. And so, is there something there? Like, the Packers game did happen, but I don't think that that's going to continue. The only problem is that we've seen some really stellar defensive performances this year. So the Vikings defense probably won't be recognized as the top defense in the NFL. The Patriots have only given up 1 score on defense. 1. And they've given up, which means 2.3% of all of their drives. Now, obviously, they've played a Luke Falk engineered Jets. They've played the third quarterback there. And then they played the Miami Dolphins, who are actively attempting to not win. And then they played Pittsburgh, who they just destroyed. And I don't think Pittsburgh's all that bad. So that is a more meaningful game. But if you compare their performance against the other top defenses of this decade, so if you take a look at, the 15 Broncos or the 17 Jaguars or the 13 Seahawks or whatever, and you take their 3 best games in scores per drive, they're like twice as much or more. So like the Seahawks best is 5%, the Broncos best is 15%, the Jaguars best is 5%, and New England's at like 2%. So that's incredible. And I think that even after you account for the fact that they played some pretty terrible opponents, New England might have a better defense than the Vikings do, and they've got a pretty decent quarterback as well. So that's going to be tough. But luckily they're in the AFC, so you don't have to worry about them until week 19 or whatever. But which, I mean, if you're there, I mean, I think Vikings fans are happy. But I think the defense, it puts them into a conversation where they could be one of the top teams in the NFL. Right now, I'd say the offense is probably above average. Obviously, they couldn't really do a ton against the Packers initially, but the fact that they ended up by the end of the game being competitive, despite being a 21-0 hole, I think says a lot of good things about the offense, despite the turnovers. And then obviously, the Falcons game, a lot of that wasn't even offensive. I mean, the pump block set them up in a really good spot. In the Raiders game, a lot of it has to do with really favorable field position. So you can't say that the offense is great, but I think that the evidence suggests that they're above average. So I'll say a great defense, above average offense. That sounds like a top 5 team to me, but that's a very soft, declaration, right? Because you're right, we haven't learned a ton, but the early indications are that they're really in a spot to be one of the top teams in the league.
And we'll certainly take that. Next question is from Anton, who asks, does Ben Gideon in fact exist, or is he a figment of our imaginations?
He's played well. And he does exist, I promise. But I think this game was so he didn't play in week 2. He was inactive. So they had Eric Wilson play his role, which is a mismatch, but he actually played decently. Week 1, he had 20 or so snaps. I thought he played really well. Week 3, he had the same number of snaps. I thought, he got exploited in coverage a little bit. I think that was one of Darren Waller's things. But he did all right in run defense. I don't think he got any tackles, so you didn't get to hear his name, but I thought he did a good job, squeezing lanes and stuff. So he's all right. Good to see.
Just because we're not hearing his name doesn't mean he has just disappeared off the planet in a Thanos snap or something.
Right, yeah. And, a guy who gets 20 snaps a game for 60 to 70 snaps, his impact it seems lower than maybe it should be, but I still think he's playing fine.
All right, next question is from Matt Fries, who asks, do the NFL teams also have to deal with watching the horrible Soldier Field All-22 angle, or is Game Pass holding out on us?
The rumor is that the other NFL teams have to deal with it, but the Bears don't. The Bears have their own All-22. That's the rumor. There's no source reporting on this, but people very strongly believe that this is the case.
That is pretty ridiculous. Caleb Barnes asks, would it be more accurate, or who would be more accurate, rather, hitting receivers on the left side of the field, Trubisky or Blair Walsh kicking a field goal in a pressure situation?
I have to go with Trubisky here. I'm sorry.
Are you within 20 yards, or are you within 40? Because I think there's a steep drop-off after 10.
Trubisky... throwing to the left downfield on passes beyond the line of scrimmage. Last year, he had some successes, which is more than you can say for Blair Walsh, because he didn't play last year.
I like that as your caveat. That I suppose that works. Which Vikings/Redskins quarterback mistake was dumber? From Kenneth Allen. Cousins kneeling out the half in the red zone, or Keenum thinking he could end the play by crossing the yard to gain on 4th down while not near the end zone.
So a bunch of people clowned Keenum for it, and rightly so. That was wrong. But I believe Drew Brees did the same thing, and they just gave it to him. And the announcers were like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. What? But, and Ezekiel Elliott did it too, and they just gave it to him. I think they apply the rule of forward progress here and nowhere else. So in theory, that does give you the yardage, but obviously the play doesn't end. So, and that's a very fumbleable position to be in. So they just do it and force fumbles. But there's a precedent for that working. There is no precedent for kneeling when you have to spike. That seems to be just a completely bad move.
Yeah, that
so
never
I get
goes
that
well. One. Corey Rug asks, should The Good Place delay their season to reshoot and pay homage to Minshew II?
Yes. 100%.
I don't even watch The Good Place. I just know that they have a thing for the Jags, and they've made jokes about the Jags being good. I think that Minshew needs to be everywhere for the next 2 or 3 weeks until we're all sick of him.
There was an interview that they did where someone asked them, this is after the 2017 season where the Jaguars made it to the AFC Championship or whatever. And someone asked them hey, was it weird when the Jaguars started playing really well? And they were like, yeah, it ruined a ton of stuff for us. But, you just got to view that as an opportunity for even more hilarious jokes. So that's what we did.
They should have just kept going with it. I feel like that would have been the better idea. Don from Ohio asks, how is Arif feeling right now after Teddy Bridgewater beat his favorite team last weekend? Must be like his Dukes were playing against themselves.
Well, I don't have any particular regard for the Seahawks. go Teddy. I wish he actually played well. Were I actually a fan of the Seahawks, it's the worst of all possible worlds because, yeah, the Saints win, but Teddy played pretty poorly. So, what does that count for? Like, the first 2 touchdowns, one was a special teams touchdown, one's a defensive touchdown, and now Teddy gets to game manage the whole time, and he doesn't even do a phenomenal job of that. He does get to have 2 throwing touchdowns in his arsenal, but, neither of them were impressive. So, yeah, you can't even take that with you. You can't just be like, well, at least the guy I like did well, because he didn't. Good thing I don't care about the Seahawks.
Speaking of the Seahawks, I just wanted to get your opinion on the most garbage time touchdowns I think I've ever seen in the throw by Russell Wilson with, I don't even think there was a second left on the clock.
0 sec. It was an untimed down, yeah.
An untimed down. You're already down. There's no chance for you to win this game. And they managed to throw a touchdown at the end of the game. Like, wow, that was just for the fantasy owners right there, wasn't it?
They might have hit the over on that. So some bettors were probably upset or happy. But yeah, that definitely swung some fantasy games this week. Incredible. Untimed down, they go for it.
Yeah. Also from Don from Ohio, there was a tweet out by I forget which Avengers actor, but it was his question is, which Avengers actor or actress would you like to have in the Norse Code Fantasy Football League? And which one do you think would succeed the best or fail the worst? Apparently, the guy who plays Spider-Man is the absolute worst in their league. I like the idea that they have an Avengers fantasy league.
I love the idea that they got this British guy that doesn't care about football into their fantasy league. That's incredible. And he's doing particularly horribly, although obviously it would be better if he was winning the league.
Like Tom Holland's just running away with it at this point.
Yeah, and he's not even checking the roster, right? He's just like, yeah, my team auto drafted and I got Tom Brady and stuff, so cool.
What's a bye week?
But yeah, first of all, actor is not fun at all. I would definitely rather have an Avenger in the league than an actor. That said, it would have to be Thor because he plays video games and is clearly very online.
And the trash talking between weeks would be spectacular.
Yeah, it would be phenomenal. Someone was trash talking me this week in the Norse Code League. Alert, we're talking about fantasy. And they're like, wow, Arif, I can't believe you're going to lose, even though my kicker missed an extra point, which is embarrassing. But then my kicker missed an extra point, and so I was saved the indignity of having to worry about whether or not I would have won. I got destroyed, but I'm 3-0 in the other league, so screw you guys.
Well, I'm glad you're happy, if nothing else.
Yeah, well, I beat you last week for it, so.
Yeah, well. This league is so dumb. I love it so much.
A true test of skill, but mostly patience.
Yeah, let's go with that. That is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. We will be back later in the week to preview the Bears game with Lauren Cox. Arif, what do you have to plug for us?
Like I mentioned, that piece at The Athletic about substantial takeaways you can get from the Raiders game, which, difficult to come by. But also coming up, I'll have a piece about, how the Vikings match up against the Bears, etc.
Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Once again, the announcement is on November 29th. We will be taping a live edition of Norse Code from Petoskey's in Seattle, Washington. So all of you Vikings fans and Seahawks fans, who I just assume are Arif fans as well, come out to Petoskey's on November 29th. That is going to be it for this episode. Again, for Arif and Dusty, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that revenge is a dish best served funky as hell, and we will see you later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at norsecodepodcast. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/norsecode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/norsecode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.